All right. You just check here. Uh, huh, interesting. Yeah, well, what I want to cover is something called the 88 precepts. I feel like this needs to be spoken about because a lot of people associate this with the false sense of white supremacy that gets pushed around when it's got nothing to do with it. While it does speak to specifically white people, it's got nothing to do with superiority. In fact, it preaches the exact opposite of this. And the only way to actually get some people, whoever may see the video, to understand is to show them, so that people understand that this is not associated with this so-called white supremacy. So this is kind of what I want to cover in this video on the stream. All that the 88 precepts essentially covers is just about natural law. So let me do this. We can go to this screen. And then let's see if we can find, there you go. Let's pull it down over here. See, maybe we can put this in here rather. Let's go here rather. Alright. So, yeah, a little bit of context. The National Socialists, which is essentially Germany in, pre-World War II era. This is something that they believed in, and this is where the whole narrative of that this is some white supremacist type of ideology, which it is not. In fact, I don't think anything of Germany was really about white supremacy. But that is a different conversation for a different day. And this video should be specifically about the 88 precepts and what they mean. So, these are the 14 words, which is where 1488 comes from. The 14 is obviously these 14 words. A lot of people confuse it with HH, which is the first 8 letters of the alphabet, which is often referred to as Heil Hitler. But the 14 in that doesn't mean anything, doesn't have anything to do with that. It doesn't have to do with the 14th letter of the alphabet. It just means the 14 words, which is we must secure the existence of our people and a future for white children. This is just saying that people deserve, white people specifically, deserve to exist. We have to have a future for our people, and, to have our white children be able to have an entitlement to a future where they don't have to worry about what is going to happen to them, that they don't have to struggle. And the 88 out of the 1488 obviously comes from these precepts, which I'm about to go through. So that's 1488 explained. It's the 14 words and the 88 precepts. So until the white race realizes that there's only one source from which we can ascertain last truths, there will never be peace or stability on this earth. And the immutable laws of nature are the keys to life, order and understanding. The words of men, even those which some consider inspired, are subject to the translation, vocabulary, additions, subtractions, and distortions of the fallible mortals. Therefore, let me just pause this music. Therefore, every writing or influence, ancient or modern, must be strained through the test of conformity to natural law. The white peoples of the earth must collectively understand that they are equally subject to the iron, hard laws of nature with every other creature of the universe, or they will not secure peace, safety, nor even their existence. So, before we get too deep down into this, essentially that little paragraph there, what it's explaining is that we have to abide by natural law, just as every other creature in the entire universe will have to abide by natural law. This is not something that you can negotiate with. This is the way that nature is. And anyone that knows who Mother Nature is knows that you cannot arm wrestle with Mother Nature and think you're going to win. So this means that we must essentially be at peace with everything in the universe, as long as it doesn't bring any type of destruction or harm to our people. The world is in flames because races, sub-races, nations, and cultures are being forced to violate their own nature ordained instincts for self-preservation. Many men of goodwill but little understanding are struggling against symptoms which are the result of disobedience to natural law. As in the nature of man, most take narrow, provincial stances predicted on views formed by immediate environment, current circumstances, and conditional dogma. This is encouraged by that powerful and ruthless tribe which has controlled the affairs of the world for untold centuries by exploiting man's most base instincts. Conflict among and between the unenlightened serves as their mask and shield. A deeper understanding of the fundamental laws that govern the affairs of man in a shield. A deeper understanding of fundamental laws that govern the affairs of man is necessary if we are to save civilization from its usury executioners. These few pages are not intended to provide a detailed system of government, but the precepts which, when understood, will benefit and preserve a people of individuals and as a nation. So, this is precept number 1. Any religion or teaching which denies natural laws of the universe is false. So, what this means is, if there's religion that preaches that all cultures, all people, and all of living creatures can just coexist in the same place, is false, because this is not true. So if religion tells me that I can coexist with someone of a different culture or a different race and think that everything is just going to go swell, then that religion by default would be false, because all of history will teach you that this is not true. So what if I had to give a few examples of this, is that in nature, which is natural law, a lion does not want to coexist with a zebra, and a hyena will never coexist with a buck or any other prey, because the cycle of life requires them to be part of a certain food chain. And a hyena or a lion, any predator essentially, is not going to coexist with prey in order to coexist in nature. This is just impossible, because all of natural law would then fail. So any religion that denies natural law is essentially false. And people might say, well, we are all but just humans. And this is true. No one is going to dispute that all of us are humans. But at the same time, anybody that is going to try to convince you that we are all the same is delusional. They do not understand that we are not the same. And if we were the same, there would be no difference at all. There would be no racial difference, and there'd be no cultural difference. Because we are racially different, and because we are culturally different, this is natural to acknowledge, and it is not a bad thing. It is a good thing. But at the same time, we cannot sit and tell ourselves that we all have the same cultures, the same racial groups. And one thing about natural law is that you're always going to have in-group preference to your own people. This is true even in societies where integration has been forced. So in South Africa, the black people, they generally stay in black areas. What we refer to as colored people, who are mixed between the Khoisan, the Bantus, the Dutch, the Malays, and various other groups of people. They are of mixed race people, but they are their own racial group now. And the Indian people, they're going to be in their communities, the white people are going to be in their communities, and the other Asians will be in theirs. This does not mean that you cannot interact in society. This doesn't mean that you can't have a friend of another racial group. All that this is stating is that in-group preference means that you want to be around your own, which is perfectly normal and is perfectly fine. Precept number 2. Whatever people's perception of God or gods or the motive force of the universe might be, they can hardly deny that nature's law are of the work of, and therefore the intent of, that force. So if God created everything as it is, and he created nature the way that it is, then natural law is God's law. This is just common sense, and anyone that's denying this is denying the law of God. So this is not a religion, but if God intended nature to be that way, then we as people cannot question the way that God designed everything, the way that everything turned out. That is for God to decide and for God to answer for. Okay, precept number 3. God and religion are distinct, separate and often conflicting concepts. Nature evidence the divine plan for the natural world is the work of the force or the intelligent men called God. Religion is the creation of mortals, therefore predestined to fallibility. Religion may preserve or destroy people depending on the structure given by its progenitors, motives of its agents, and the vagaries of its historical circumstances. So, this is basically telling you that God has no religion. He has his way. And people essentially establish religion by written books, which they try and use to understand God. And they've done this through scripture that was written by people that wrote books that we've added into holy books, such as the Bible, the Quran, the Talmud, the Torah, all these types of books. So it is just a record of maybe historical events throughout biblical times, but that is what is established as a religion, and that is a creation of people, not of God. And basically what that is explaining to you is that religion is determined by the people that write it. So whoever is writing that those scriptures will claim that they got it from God, and that is fine if people want to believe that. I'm not saying that you should be against your religion. All that this is saying is that it is a creation of people, and if religion is written in such a way where it is designed to destroy people or essentially preserve a certain aspect of people, then that is done through and interpreted by historical events. Okay, precept number 4. The truest form of a prayer is communion with nature. It is not vocal. Go to a lonely spot, if possible, a mountaintop. On a clear starlit night, ponder the majesty and order of the infinite macrocosm. Then consider the intricacies and equally infinite microcosm. Understand that you are one and one hand inconsequential beyond comprehension in size of the things, and on the other hand you are potentially valuable beyond comprehension as a link in destiny's chain. There you begin to understand how pride and self can coexist with respect and reverence. There we will find harmony with nature, and with harmony comes strength, peace, and certainty. So, again, what this is saying is that we are very, very tiny in the universe. We are essentially made up of the ingredients of the universe. Now, the way that we became about will always be a question that only God can answer, and why we are here. I think we all have a certain purpose to be here, but once you ponder how big the universe is and how we came about, we'll know that this is no mistake, and that we are just a very, very tiny part of the universe, and that God made no mistake when creating us. This is not by accident. There's no ways that a place like Earth, for example, could exist with the exact right temperature, with water, an atmosphere, and thriving life. And this is done by God Himself, and it is up to us to be able to acknowledge that everything that has been designed this way by God Himself has been established through natural law. And natural law is what we should be embracing. Okay, precept number 5. Secular power systems protect and promote religions which teach of an afterlife. Thus, people are taught to abandon defense against the predators of this life. So, in a secular society where you have religions that promote some sort of afterlife, where you'll go to heaven or hell or wherever your religion might say you may go after you die, depending whether you are a follower or not of your religion. This is told to essentially give you another purpose after your life has been fulfilled here. But at the same time, what it is saying is that essentially what's going to happen is that because you are religious, and if someone is of the same religion as you, you can embrace each other as a brother or a sister through the same religion to the same God. And this is something that people can use to exploit, to essentially get into your nation and, you know, ultimately destroy the nations that your forefathers built, or your racial group as a people, and essentially subvert your nation. So we see this today. We see this all over Europe. We see this all over specifically the West, where the West have allowed a bunch of different people in the name of multiculturalism and tolerance. And to this day, we see a lot of that being pushed in such a way where it is destroying every nation, because predators have been allowed to come in, predators have been allowed to have a say in nations that they do not belong in, that they are essentially just visitors in, and have gained power. And this is all done in the name of being secular and accepting of anyone, because we are essentially all just people trying to live life. Whereas this doesn't protect those nations from the people who are essentially the ones that have ill intent and want to possibly harm your nation and your people within it. Okay, precept number 6. History, both secular and religious, is a fable conceived in self-serving deceit and promulgated by those who perceive benefits. So, if there's a society which is both secular and religious, this is pretty much a hypocritical type of nation, because it is a nation that essentially will preach one set of rules, but have different rules for every group. So you can have a nation where you can have Christianity, Islam, Judaism, Hinduism, all these different religions, and it's going to preach these religious ideologies where you're going to essentially have people that will benefit in a certain way because their religion claims that this is their way of life. So, for example, with Muslims, if they move to a certain nation, they are going to demand or try and assert their religion in a sense where they do not want other people to dress in a certain way. They only want them to conform to the way that Islam is going to tell them. They're going to tell them that their religion is not true, that they should abandon their false idols, that they can't eat certain foods, and essentially they must live in a certain way which Muslims will feel is fit. And this is not just about Islam. All religions are going to preach this way unless those religions are essentially corrupted. Okay, precept number 7. Religion, in its most beneficial form, is the symbology of a people and their culture. A multiracial religion destroys the sense of uniqueness, exclusivity, and values necessary to a survival of a race. So, what this is trying to say to you is that religion is going to be a symbol of unity amongst any racial group and any culture. So Christianity will teach you, for example, that we are all just the same. We are brothers in Christ. It doesn't matter who you are and where you descend from. And even if you had to mix those two races, it would be no different, because everyone is just a brother in Christ and we are all just human. This is the way that you can essentially erase the identity of a different racial group. And this has been part of history as well, where this has happened, where you can outbreed a specific group of people where they no longer exist, which essentially allows you to conquer those people and claim what was rightfully theirs. Now, if racial groups didn't exist, if we weren't all different genetically, physically, culturally, and all that, then we would all just be one people. But this is not true. We are not one people. We are all different, and that's a great thing. I prefer it that way, because you cannot celebrate diversity if there is no diversity. If there's only one group of people that are all exactly the same, you cannot, by definition, then celebrate having diversity in humanity. So precept number 8, what men call supernatural is actually the natural, not yet understood or revealed. It's pretty self-explanatory. So whatever we don't understand, we label as supernatural, because that is beyond our understanding, and we have not yet figured that out. Precept number 9, a proliferation of laws with the resultant loss of freedom is a sign of a directly proportional to spiritual sickness in a nation. Also pretty self-explanatory. In a nation where you have limited freedom, like a dictatorship or a communist nation, is pretty much the signal of a dying nation, where people are not free anymore and will ultimately be ruled over whoever's trying to control that nation. Precept number 10, if a nation is devoid of spiritual health and moral character, then government and unprincipled men will fill the vacancy. Therefore, freedom prospers in moral values and tyranny thrives in moral decay. So this is pretty much what precept number 9 is saying. It's saying that, if a nation doesn't have its identity with its people and the moral standards in society, with a corrupt government, then men should fill that vacancy and stand up, so that freedom will prosper and moral values and tyranny will essentially, well, not tyranny, but morals will continue and tyranny will essentially die. Tyranny won't have a place in that society. 11. Truth requires little explanation. Therefore, beware of verbose doctrines. The great principles are revealed in brevity. So, generally, the truth is self-explanatory. The truth will always explain itself. If you generally need to find yourself explaining it, it's either because there's been a certain narrative being pushed about it and the truth has been subverted. And there's that old saying that if you repeat a lie enough times, eventually it becomes the truth. But if you've got the real truth, then essentially that should explain itself. 12, as I was just saying, the truth does not fear investigation. If if the truth is out there and it is proven with a fact or evidence, then the truth does not need to be explained. It will explain itself. 13. Unfounded belief is pitfall. A people who do not check the validity and effect of their beliefs with reason will suffer or perish. So if you just believe whatever you are told to believe in, say your religion, your laws, or anything for that matter, and you don't check that it is valid, then essentially you are easy to indoctrinate, you are easy to fool, and you probably won't last very long. You will become weak because you can be controlled. 14. In accord with nature's laws, nothing is more right than the preservation of one's own race. This is 100% true. If this was false, then all of racial groups in the world would have been completely changed. Africans have been Africans for hundreds of thousands years old by the least. European people have been European and white people for hundreds of thousands of years at least. It's important to note that there's genetic cousins. So the Caucasian race, for example, which would consist of Persian people who are Indo-European, the Coptic people who also share Caucasian DNA, Arab people who share Caucasian DNA, Jewish people that share Caucasian DNA, and European people that share Caucasian DNA. This is an entire group who are genetically related one way or another, but have separate racial groups. And if those racial groups are not protected and preserved, then those racial groups will cease to exist, which would essentially go against natural law as well. Okay, 15. No greater motivating force exists than the certain conviction that one is right. So, there's no better motivator than being right, and again, the way that you assert that you are correct in any situation is to prove that with logic, reason, and obviously evidence. That is another big part of it. 16. Discernment is a sign of a healthy people. In a sick, dying nation, civilization, culture, or race, substance is abandoned in favor of appearance. So, if people give up their moral standards, their societal standards, give up their way of civilization, they abandon their culture or their race, essentially they're going to do all of that for acceptance or some sort of immoral deed, then this is going to be a nation that ultimately declines and becomes an intolerable society that you would not want to live in. So we have examples of this where we've got porn in society, we've got degeneracy, and I don't want to sound hateful towards any groups, but unfortunately I have to say that the alphabet community, which is the LGBTQ, the trans ideology, all of these things which destroy people and their lives, essentially promotes the decline of a nation. So if you've got everyone who is suddenly turning gay or trying to change their genders, so on and so on, traditional family values fall away. Having families becomes an issue, and essentially that nation of people starts to have decline in a birth rate, and this is where all your problems start. Okay, 17. Discernment includes the ability to recognize the difference between belief and demonstrable reality. So you should be able to recognize the difference between something that you can tell that is reality and something that is false. So my personal beliefs, for example, I believe that there are only two genders, which is male and female. I don't think sex and gender is a different thing. It is my belief that these are the same because we only have male and female biologically. And I will not be swayed any other way because that would make me delusional. 18. There exists no such thing as rights or privileges under the laws of nature. The deer being stalked by a hungry lion has no right to life. However, he may purchase life by obedience to nature, ordained instinct for vigilance and flight. Similarly, men have no rights to life, liberty, or happiness. These circumstances may be purchased by oneself, by one's family, by one's tribe, or by one's ancestors, but they are nonetheless purchased and not rights. Furthermore, the value of these purchases can only be maintained through vigilance and obedience to natural law. So, a lion is not going to feel sorry for hunting the deer. The only way that this deer can purchase any type of right to his life is through abiding by natural law. And if his instinct is to be smarter in nature, where he can be more aware of the dangers, and he can essentially escape being caught and taken down, then he has won he's basically purchased his way of life. Other than that, he would have no right to life because that lion would have decided his fate if the deer had been caught. The lion would not negotiate with the deer. They're not going to go to a court to hash it out. They're not going to sit and discuss it. The lion is going to do what he's going to do, and essentially he's going to have to eat to survive. Because if the deer doesn't get away, then the lion gets to survive. And if the deer does get away, essentially the lion could be the one that loses his right to life, and therefore hasn't purchased his way into survival. 19. A people who are not convinced of their uniqueness and value will perish. So if you do not think you are distinctive to anybody else in the world, and you are just going to accept that you as a black man or a white man, Chinese, whoever, are just as ordinary as anyone else, you will not take pride in your unique part of who you are ancestrally. You will not take pride in your culture or anything that you have historically, you won't take pride in the languages from which you originate. Essentially, you will be someone that has how can I say, you will be someone without any sort of foundation in your life. The white race has suffered invasions and brutality from Africa and Asia for thousands of years. For example, Attila and the Asiatic Huns who invaded Europe in the 5th century, raping, plundering, and killing from the Alps to the Baltic and the Caspian Seas. This scenario was repeated by the Mongols and Genghis Khan for 800 years later. Note here that the American Indians are not Native Americans but racial Mongolians. In the 8th century, hundreds of years before Negroes were brought into America, the North American Moors of mixed racial background invaded and conquered Portugal, Spain, and parts of France. So the attempt to guilt trip placed on the white race by civilization's executioners is invalid under both historical circumstances and under natural law, which denies interspecies compassion. The fact is, all races have benefited immeasurably from the creative genius of the Aryan people. And for more context there, Aryan doesn't just mean blonde hair, blue-eyed people. This is specific to a variant, different type of European people, which would also include Celtic, Slavic people, the Anglo-Saxons, the Saxon people, the Germanic people, and various other types of European people. This also does include the Iranian people who are Persian, because Iran does mean Aryan, and Iranians or Persian people are Indo-European. Some people will have you believe that North Indian people are also Aryan. This is also misunderstood, because Indian people were only considered Aryan culturally because of historical events, not through blood. So the only people that are considered Aryan through blood are generally European people and people of, in Indo-European heritage and blood. This would not consider Northern Indian people if it weren't for the cultural aspect of it. Okay, so precept number 21. People who allow others not to their race to live among them will perish. Again, let me repeat that. People who allow others not of their race to live among them will perish, because the inevitable result of racial integration and is racial interbreeding, which destroys characteristics and existence of a race. Forced integration is deliberate and malicious genocide, particularly for people like the white race, who are now a small minority in the world. So this can be proven with basic definitions even, but there's a group of people, I won't mention specifically who. I'm pretty sure people will understand who I'm speaking about if they ever heard this. But there is a group of people that have been trying for 3,300 years to essentially eliminate white people or European people from this planet, and they have never had the numbers or the force to do it physically, so they've had to find creative ways to try to do this using other racial groups who they see as inferior to to them, which would include white people. They see everyone as inferior to this group of people, and they want to essentially use miscegnation. Now, that's the definition that I'm referring to. If you Google miscegnation, you'll see that it's specifically about racial mixing, but especially if it's got something to do with white people. So that is what miscegnation is. And with white people being a small minority in the world, if they had to force integration with other racial groups, essentially that's going to promote racial mixing in society, which would ultimately lead to the genocide of white people, because if they are white people and they race mix, they are no longer white, they are now mixed. And because these other racial groups are much bigger, they will essentially not have such a big impact, but white people will be bred out of existence a lot easier. Number 22, in the final analysis, a race or species is not judged superior or inferior by its accomplishments, but by its will and ability to survive. So, even with animals are not superior over each other just because they simply exist or because of something that they've accomplished, but just by the abilities to survive. So if they have good survival instincts, if they are proficient in nature, and they know how to find food and water and live a healthy life, this is what they will be judged on, whether they are superior or inferior. Someone or something, an animal that cannot find food or cannot find water will essentially be inferior because it will eventually end up dying of starvation or thirst. This would be an inferior creature, and that is pretty much where that gene pool would end. The superior ones would always exist because they are the ones that will ultimately find things like food and water. They are the ones that will always have survival instincts, and so that their genes will be passed on. This is the difference between superior and inferior, not by racial group and not by species. So you would not say that a zebra is superior over a horse simply because one thinks that they're better than the other. It would likely depend on which one of those animals between the horse or the zebra could find food, find water, so on and so on. If one cannot find food, that one would be the inferior one regardless of the species. The other one would be superior because he found food or water regardless of his species. Just give me 2 seconds and I'll be here now. All right, I'm back. Sorry for keeping you waiting. Let's see. Okay. I will continue now to the 23rd precept in a sec. All right. So, precept number 23. Political, economic, and religious systems may be destroyed and resurrected by men, but the death of a race is eternal. So, we can install whatever political ideology, economic system, and religious system, whether it be Christianity, Islam, whatever it may be. These can always be revived by different men, regardless of their race or their cultures or whatever. But the death of a certain racial group will always be eternal. So once a racial group is no longer in existence, you cannot bring them back. Precept number 24. No race of people can indefinitely continue their existence without territorial imperatives in which they propagate, protect, and promote their own kind. So this essentially starts talking about things like borders and protecting nations and defending them. This is why things like mass immigration is very controversial to this day, is because once you allow all kinds of racial aliens into your society and you allow them to conquer your countries, they will take your territories and they will destroy it, or they will rule over you, where essentially your people will either decline and become extinct, and if you do not protect that and promote your own kind, then that would lead in the decline of your racial group, your culture, and everything else that you should have ultimately protected. Right, number 25. A people without a culture exclusively their own will perish. So if you do not have your own culture, you will essentially have no identity. And if you have no identity, then your people have no foundation, they have no morals to work on, and they essentially have no history. 26. Nature has put a certain antipathy between races and species to preserve their individuality and the existence of each. A violation of territorial imperative necessary to preserve that antipathy leads to either conflict or mongrelization. So what it is saying is, if racial groups do not protect their individual identities and the existence of that, that means that those racial groups will essentially be mixed, and you will not have any racial, cultural, or any sort of background. So if African and a Chinese had to racially mix, they are neither African anymore or Chinese. They are essentially a mongrelized race which don't belong anywhere. because a racial Chinese person is not going to accept someone who is half Chinese, half black. Although they can integrate into society, they will still not be one or the other. And in a sense where a mongrelized African person, for example, that is half Chinese and half African, is not going to be completely accepted within the African community. So we see this even within Africa, where we have albinos that are not even mongrelized. They are just genetically defect from natural Africans. They are still often persecuted and ostracized from society because they are different from the collective group. This would apply to basically any racial group anywhere in the world. 27. This is one of my favorites personally because it explains that, having a racial hatred towards other people is nonsensical. So 27 says that it is not constructive to hate those of other races or even those of mixed races, but a separation must be maintained for the survival of one's own race. One must, however, hate with a pure and perfect hatred those of one's own race who commit treason against one's own kind and against the nations of one's own kind. One must hate with perfect hatred of those people or practices which destroy one's people, one's culture, or racial exclusiveness of one's territorial imperative. So basically, what this is saying is that it is not beneficial for you to just hate on a different race just because they are different. This will not gain you anything in society. It will not further you as a racial group. And essentially, you are just doing something because you have a nonsensical hatred for other people, which means that if I just go around hating other racial groups just because they are a different racial group, this essentially is not going to benefit me in any way. It's not going to benefit my people in any way, and it's not going to benefit my society in any way. But if there is other racial groups which seek to destroy my racial group in a way that they're trying to eliminate my people, harm my nation, or do anything that causes my people to ultimately have any sort of decline, then a hatred of those people can be applied. So it wouldn't be applied to the entire racial group, but it would be applied to the racial group of the people who are trying to do it. So if a racial group from a different race had to come to my people to destroy them, I can hate that particular racial group that is trying to do it, but it wouldn't apply in the sense that, let's use an example, if it was African people trying to come to Europe to destroy Europeans, I could hate that racial group for trying to do that, but it doesn't benefit me to hate all of African people who are still in Africa that have no desire to destroy my people, because they are not the ones committing that against my people. It would only be the Africans that are in Europe who are trying to accomplish this. Those are the only people that I should hate. And the other people that I have a valid hatred for is if one of my own people, for example, so me as a white person, if I had other white people trying to work against preserving my people my own race, my culture, my history, my languages, that is what would be considered treasonous against my own people, since it is one of my own trying to essentially destroy what we are. Okay, 28. The concept of a multiracial society violates every natural law for species preservation. So again, this is going back to the whole example of how in nature, not every species of animal is going to just coexist, because this would essentially violate natural law. A lion doesn't mix with a buck, and bucks don't mix with a hedgehog, and so on and so on. There is certain species that can exist in society, but they do not have a concept of a multi-racial or multicultural society in nature where they can all coexist within the same spaces. And even though these are all different species of animal, this can still be applied to things like birds. A pigeon is always going to be a pigeon. Eagles are always going to be with eagles. Hummingbirds are always going to be with hummingbirds. Hawks are always going to be with hawks. They do not mix. They do not have a multiracial or multicultural society where they all coexist within the same spaces. They're always going to have that in-group preference, and therefore that is natural law, and this is what it is speaking on when a multiracial society violates every natural law for species preservation. 29. The concept of equality is declared a lie by every evidence of nature. It is in search for the lowest common denominator, and its pursuit will destroy every superior race, nation, or culture. In order for a plow horse to run as fast as a racehorse, you would first have to cripple the racehorse. Conversely, in order for a racehorse to pull as much as a plow horse, you would first have to cripple a plow horse. In either case, the pursuit of equality is the destruction of excellence. So if I am better at running than somebody else, in the pursuit of equality, they would have to handicap me in order to have equality for someone who is not as great of a runner as me. This is what equality essentially is. It's the restriction of someone who is better at doing something else to equal the playing field. This is what equality is, and this is also against natural law, because if you need to restrict me in order to make me more equal to someone who isn't as good as something, then this is essentially a violation against my capabilities, and that is all done in the name of equality. 30. The instincts for a racial and species preservation are ordained by nature. So it is natural. It is every species' instinct to preserve the species of that particular animal, which is part of natural law. Pigeons are always going to try and breed with pigeons to preserve the species of pigeons. So it is like that with every other single living animal on this planet. 31. Instincts are nature's perfect mechanism for the survival of each race and species. The human's weakness of rationalizing situations for self-gratification must not be permitted to interfere with these instincts. So, the perfect mechanism for the survival of each race and species, the human weakness. So rationalizing the survival instinct of every people and essentially every animal, when you have to second guess it, when you have to try and change the instinct thereof, which it will ultimately lead in disaster. Because if your instinct is to do a certain thing in nature, then that is what is going to essentially be a strength. And second guessing these instincts will be the weakness in which you will become one of those inferior species, regardless of race. 32. Miscegenation, that is race mixing, is and always has been the greatest threat to survival of the Aryan race. So again, specifically, this is speaking to what I described as the Aryan race. It's not just European people. These are people that are also Indo-European. And Muhammad Ali actually spoke on this before, where he had explained that, integration is going to essentially allow for interracial marriages, which is going to give you mixed race babies. And in society, this is often frowned upon, and it's not because of the societal standard. This is just because people want their children to look like them. So if you are black, then you surely want to have a child that looks exactly like you, that is a black baby, that you can relate with. Even in an interracial marriage, a black person is not going to mix with a Cuban because their culture is it has differences. They're not going to be able to relate in the same way. Their music background is not going to be the same. Their life experiences are not going to be the same. So therefore, it is not going to apply and have any type of relation. Whereas that child is going to grow up looking different, is going to have mixed cultures that may even conflict with each other. So while this is talking about specifically white people, you can apply this to basically any other racial group and it will still make sense. 33. Interspecies compassion is contrary to the laws of nature and is therefore suicidal. If a wolf were to intercede to save a lamb from a lion, he would be killed. Today, we see the white man taxed so heavily that he cannot afford children. The taxes raised are then used to support the breeding of tens of millions of non-whites, many of whom then demand the last white females for breeding partners. As you can see, man is subject to all laws of nature. This has nothing to do with morality, hatred, good or evil. Nature does not recognize the concepts of good and evil in an interspecies relationship. If the lion eats the lamb, it is good for the lion, and evil for the lamb. If the lamb escapes and the lion starves, it is good for the lamb and evil for the lion. So we see the same incident is labeled both good and evil. This cannot be, for there is no contradictions within nature's law. So again, this is something that the West keeps doing as well, is that white people are told to feel guilty about their history, about who they are, and essentially being white is a crime to everybody else, and they tell white people that they should be ashamed of who they are. Then what happens is white people are told that they are supposed to take in the whole entire world. They're supposed to help the entire world, and we're supposed to fund the entire world and essentially save everyone from poverty and everything else that is wrong in the world. And in pure evidence we have today is where, like with the UK, for example, we have a lot of people going into the UK. They are claiming asylum. They get put into hotels. They claim benefits. They have preferential treatment over the English people, and the English people are struggling to have children because they cannot afford this, because we are too busy funding all the other racial groups, and for them to have children, they promote having children, and while we are told to have abortions, they tax us in such ways that we cannot afford to have our own families. And when we have declining birth rates, then they are essentially told that we need all these immigrants to keep our nations going. And when these people are brought into society, this is when miscegenation is essentially promoted. This is when other racial groups are told to interbreed with our women, which essentially is going to end the white race, because they will no longer be white, they will be mixed. And this is what this whole precept is talking about. The instinct for sexual union is part of nature's perfect mechanism for species preservation. It begins early in life and often continues until late in life. It must not be repressed. Its purpose, reproduction, must not be thwarted either. Understand that for thousands of years our females bore children at early age. Now, in an attempt to conform to the compete in an alien culture, they deny their nature-ordained instincts and duties. Teach responsibility, but also have understanding. The life of race springs from the womb and of its woman. He who would judge must first understand the difference between what is good and what is right. So what this is explaining here is that essentially for a very, very long time, women were there to have our children, and from that they were there to take care of our children. And nowadays what we see is we have feminism, where women are told to go out there and be strong and independent, and that they don't need men, which is essentially another contributor to the decline of birth rates, because women then don't focus on having families. And the ones that do end up having families, they end up sending their children to be looked after by complete strangers who do not have the best interests of those children. And furthermore, what that also means is that they are leaving the future of their children and what they learn in the hands of essentially like a government entity, which is generally the education department. And these people who do not have your children's best interests at heart will be free to teach your children whatever they decide is fit in society. So if they wanted to teach your children family values that are different to what you grew up with, or what you understand to be fit and moral obligations in a family, they can teach your child that it is okay to change their gender, that it is okay to essentially accept being gay or any of this. And this is how they then change the minds of children from a very, very young, early age. Okay, so where are we now? 35. Homosexuality is a crime against nature. All nature declares the purpose of the instinct for the sexual union in reproduction, and thus preservation of the species. The overpowering male sex drive must be channeled towards possession of females, as well as elements such as territory and power, which are necessary to keep. So, again, homosexuality is something to essentially stunt the reproduction cycle within society, and which would ultimately end or slow down reproduction in a nation. So if a lot of people end up becoming gay, they would not reproduce with the opposite sex, and therefore you would have a lot less children in society because of that. So what it's saying is that men are not going to own women as a possession, like a car or a house or a valuable item that you may have, but women should be the possession of men, in the sense that men and women should be able to come together and have children in society, and it should be in the lead of the man to maintain his territory and his power in order to keep that in society. So we should not allow government institutions or any other subversive influence to change that. The men should essentially hold that territory and that power, so that we can maintain a society where we constantly have reproduction. Okay, 36. Sexual pornography degrades the nature of all who are involved. A beautiful nude woman is art. A camera between her knees to explore her private parts is pornography. So the problem with pornography is that if you are viewing this type of material, what this is going to do is this is going to distract you from going to go and find a woman out in society and ultimately reproducing with her and creating more offspring. Instead, you will be distracted by something that will bear no children and is going to ultimately satisfy you in somewhat of the same way. So, in other words, you're going to rub one out, but you are not going to reproduce with anyone because you did not breed with a woman to have more offspring. That race whose males will not fight to death to keep the mate with their families will perish. Any white man with healthy instincts feels disgust and revulsion when he sees a woman of his race with another man of another race. Those who today control the media and affairs of the Western world teach that this is wrong and shameful. They label it racism, and any ism, for instance, the word nationalism means to promote one's own nation. Racism merely means to promote and protect the life of one's own race. It is perhaps the proudest word in existence. Any man who disobeys these instincts is anti-nature. So, this is saying that if random example, if if an African and a Chinese had to essentially mix with each other, either the black people would have a problem with the Chinese people essentially taking the African racial people and interbreeding with them, and vice versa, with the Chinese people as well. And this is generally pushed through media to promote race mixing, which is to essentially destroy racial groups. And if you say anything against this, it's then labeled as racism, because people should apparently feel free to be with whoever they want, which essentially would destroy a racial group. It would destroy your genetic ancestry of where you come from. So if an African had to race mix with someone else of a different race, that would essentially destroy his racial genetics, and he would not have the genetics passed down from his ancestors. He would have a genetic race that is foreign or alien to his, mixed in with his offspring. This is against nature, since racial groups already occurred naturally in nature. We were not already mixed, and therefore we should not mix. We should, in fact, keep separation. We should maintain our racial groups so that we can keep having a very diverse world and diversity in nature. We can only protect diversity if we honor our own racial groups and breed with our own racial groups to further reproduce more of our own racial group. 38. In a sick and dying nation, culture, race or civilization, political descent, and traditional values will be labeled and persecuted as heinous crimes by inquisitors clothing themselves in jingoistic patriotism. So, in a sick and dying nation, where culture, race, and civilization, political descent, and traditional values are degraded and essentially frowned upon as some sort of crime, because you should have more freedom to essentially destroy your nation, your culture, your race, your civilization, and subvert your political ideology that is for your nation. This would essentially mean that you are committing some sort of or you'd be labeled as committing some sort of crime. So if you are a homogeneous society, and say, for example, you are capitalist, and a communist came along and essentially destroyed your race, your civilization, and your political ideology to essentially replace that with their values, under a nation with their culture and whichever race that they wanted to choose, and destroy your civilization, then if you do not let this happen, that is essentially them labeling you as committing heinous crimes. So, and this is okay to oppose, because you shouldn't have to give up your nation or anything within your group of people, in your civilization, to appease to any other group of people that want to come and subvert that. A people who are ignorant, so on 39, a people who are ignorant on their past will defile the present and destroy their future. So if you don't know who you are, you don't know where you come from, you don't know who your ancestors are or your forefathers, and you don't understand your culture and your heritage, then essentially you don't know where you'll be heading to in the future, and you don't know who you are in the present. It's important to understand your history. It's important to understand your ancestry. It's important to understand your culture. It's important to understand your languages. This is important with any group. The Chinese do not forget their history or their culture. African people are going to be proud of their culture, their history, and their ancestry. So it is with Europeans and any other group of people. Forgetting this would essentially leave you as a very lost person, and again would leave you with no identity. Number 40, a race must honor above all earthly things those who have given their lives or freedom for the preservation of the folk. So, people who have sacrificed, especially their lives, for your freedom and the freedom and the preservation of your people, this is something that should be maintained on the highest level. So this is worth more than any earthly things, any earthly possessions that you could ever acquire, because without that, your people would cease to exist, and no earthly possessions would ever replace that. 41. The folk, namely the members of the race or a nation. Racial loyalties must always supersede geographical and national boundaries. If this is taught and understood, it will be the end of fratricidal wars. Wars must not be fought for the benefit of another race. So it doesn't behoove you to fight on the side of another race for the benefit of their wars. So, for example, it doesn't benefit white people, it doesn't benefit Africans, it doesn't benefit anyone to, say, go and fight wars in the Middle East. Essentially, this is only going to draw you into problems which had nothing to do with you in the first place, because you do not have anything to do with whatever the conflict has going on there. And this is unfortunately one of the mistakes that white people have made quite a lot in history, is that we've had World War I and World War II, which were caused by the same group of people in Europe that have been trying to essentially destroy people in Europe. And all that happened from this was that white people were fighting foreign wars that had nothing to do with us, wars that were essentially caused by a foreign group, and lobby white people to essentially kill and fight white people, thus minimizing their numbers and killing their best men. So this is not a benefit to any racial group to go and fight foreign wars, like the US government going to fight wars in the Middle East for Israel. This is not beneficial at all, because it's not the West's job or any other people that are foreign to these conflicts to go and fight the wars of another racial group. Where were we? What's it? 42. The nation's leaders are not rulers, they are servants and guardians. They are not to serve for personal gain. Choose only a guardian who has no interest in the accumulation of material things. So I agree with this. This is actually applied mostly to politicians and in some cases monarchies, where these people are not leaders or rulers. Even a king is not there to essentially rule over a nation with an iron fist. They are there to do the will of what the nation decides. So politicians, for example, they in today's societies where you could either have a democracy or a capitalist society, Marxist socialist society, or a communist society where leaders or politicians want to become rulers, they want to dictate what policies are implemented in countries, in society, and essentially this is not how it should be working. The way that it should work is that in a what you would assume would be a normal democracy is that people would essentially vote for policy, and those politicians would implement that policy, and that would be their only job. Their only job would be to serve those who vote for certain policy to be implemented. And in a democracy, that would be cast by who gets the majority vote. But we don't see this in today's societies. What we see is people either vote for the left or the right, and then whichever political party wins is the same political party that ultimately decides to draw up legislation and policies, and they implement that themselves against the will of the people that did not ultimately have any say or deciding factor on what those policies are and why they should be implemented. Okay, so 43, choose and judge your leaders, also called guardians, thus those who seek to limit the power of the government are good heart and conscious. Those who seek to expand the power of government are base tyrants. So again, going back to politicians, presidents, all that, they are there to protect the nation. They are there only to implement policy, not draft policy against the will of the people. And if they do this, then they are just tyrannical and should ultimately be removed. 44, no government can give anything to anybody without first taking it from another. Government is, by its very nature, legalized taking. A limited amount of government is necessary burden for the national defense and internal order. Anything more is counterproductive to freedom and liberty. Let me just have a sip of coffee here and then I'll explain this one. So what it is explaining here is that in order for a government to give somebody else something, they need to take it from somebody else. So if you are a taxpayer and you work very hard every day, you pay your tax every year, the government's essentially going to take that, and this is where I come in with the Marxist socialism side and the communist ideology, is that they can take that and they can essentially give it to someone who is not deserving, that should not be getting these types of benefits because they did not earn it. Instead, they are just gaining from somebody else that had to earn it, that does not benefit from it. So we see this within, say, the USA. There they have the food stamps, they've got EBT, they've got Section 8 housing, even something like free healthcare is part of Marxist socialism, which is essentially Marxist socialism is also the foundation on which communism was built. So this is the whole redistribution of wealth where people do not deserve it because they did not earn it. So in Hitler's Germany, they had something called National Socialism, which is a completely different topic, but an example of this being a complete opposite is that they had a very small government, even though Hitler is often referred to as a dictator and a fascist and all that. I mean, fascism just essentially meant to be anti-communist and anti-Bolshevik. This was the original meaning of the word until it was later then changed to just mean authoritarian and essentially a dictator. But if we look back in time at the appropriate era where that definition had a different meaning, then it will explain to you what it means. But in the sense of National Socialism, you would have essentially a smaller government that would ultimately control certain aspects of the certain industries but it is not up to the government to redistribute wealth. Essentially, it would put everyone to work, and everyone would be acquiring wealth, and they would be in charge of that wealth. So it would not be the government, like a communist dictatorship, for example, where all the people would work, and then the government would ultimately decide who gets what. This would be the other way around, where the government would put people to work, but the people would decide what happens to all the wealth and where it goes. The people would have the power over the government instead of the government over the people. This is how National Socialism originally worked in Germany, and it worked very well because Hitler had 7 million people that were all homeless and jobless, all put into work and in homes within the space of 5 years. I think within the first year and a half, he had already helped 3.5 million people this way. So that is the difference there. Let's see, 45. The organic founding law, namely the constitution of a nation, must not be amendable by any method other than unanimous consent of all parties thereto and with all parties present. Otherwise, the doors are open for the advent of those most dangerous and deadly form of government, democracy. So again, even in the USA again is another prime example of this, where the founding fathers in the 1790s Naturalization Act specifically defined what an American was, because there was no Americans before the European people. An American was an identity that was created by the European settlers that got there, and the way that they defined an American was you had to be a free white person of good moral character, and because there were slaves that were imported into the USA after that, they then had to change that law or that definition to then naturalize the people that were the slaves, so that they could essentially become American. So this is the problem with democracy, is that if a constitution can be amended and changed all the time, which in some instances is a good thing, but in some instances it's also bad. Democracy allows for your constitutions and your nations to be changed into something that could ultimately end up in disaster. Okay, so 46. In a democracy, those who control the media and thus the minds of the electorate have power undreamed by kings or dictators. So if you control the media, you get to set the narrative in society, and you get to tell the people what to essentially think. This is essentially what mainstream media does to a lot of people, is that they report on news in a specific narrative, which ultimately tries to get people to see a certain type of incident or event in a certain perspective, and that is how they change the minds of people to think in a certain way that only kings or dictators would dream of. Kings and dictators would have to do a lot more than just going out there and speaking to people. They'd have to convince people of their ideologies, which is essentially the power of what media can do. So 47, simplest way to describe democracy is this: 3 people from a government, each having 1 vote, and 2 of them vote to steal the wealth of the third. It's pretty self-explanatory. So I can vote with someone, essentially. If someone has more wealth than us, I can partner with somebody else, and it would be a 2-against-1 vote, which essentially gives us power over that person, even though that person holds more wealth, which would allow me access to that person's resources. And this is how democracy works. So 48. Let me just change this. The latter stages of a democracy are filled with foreign wars because the bankrupt system attempts to preserve itself by plundering other nations. So democracy, like for example, with wars, war is essentially an economy. If you have money to fund a war, people will make money from war because it takes a lot of resources to go to war. And the only reason you go to war is essentially to hijack somebody else's resources. So if somebody had oil and you really needed that oil and you didn't want to pay ridiculous prices, which would essentially cost a lot of money anyway, everyone would rather benefit from having a war because weapons need to be sold, manufacturing needs to happen, which essentially creates jobs, and weapons need to be sold. Well, yeah, I think I mentioned the weapons already, but logistics would have to take place. There's lots of aspects to how all of this works, but essentially anyone would benefit from war because it takes a lot of money, but it also generates a lot of money because nobody goes to war for a loss. Everyone goes to war to benefit in some sort of way. 49. In a democracy which is legal is seldom moral, and that which is moral is often illegal. So this is also very true. Generally, what they make legal is often seen as moral, which is what I was saying about policy, which generally goes against the majority that had no say in implementing policies. This is often drawn up by the politicians themselves, and whichever you see as immoral, such as, for example, going to a bank and taking out a loan and you don't feel that it's fair to pay interest, this would be seen as illegal in a society where you pay no interest. And if you refused to pay interest, you would ultimately land up in having legal action taken against you. Oh. Okay. 50. A democracy is always followed by a strong man, and some call him a dictator. It is the only way to restore order out of the chaos caused by democracy. Pick your strong man wisely. He must be a guardian in his heart. He must be one who has shown that his only purpose in life is the preservation of the folk. His ultimate aim must be to restore the rule of law based on perfect laws of nature. Do not choose him by his words. Choose one who's sacrificed all in the face of tyranny. Choose one who's endured and persevered. This is the only reliable evidence of worthiness and motives. So politicians are often known to sell you on many different policies and the promises that they make, and more than often than not, they end up never sticking to those types of promises and policies. So in my country, we've had promises of jobs and economic growth and essentially no racial laws that will restrict anyone based on their race. Simply just putting your own country's people first, just like my country, just like the USA, where it is now anti-Semitic to say that you can be America first, or to say America first is now anti-Semitic because Israel believes that this means that they will not be getting put as the priority first over everyone else. So, and if a nation's leader essentially puts any other foreign nation over his own people first, this is where it is now tyrannical and going against the will of the people. This is where politicians and presidents have now implemented policy and made choices against the will of the people. 51. A power system will do anything, no matter how corrupt or brutal, to preserve itself. So essentially, if you've got corrupt people in power, they will do anything to maintain that position of power so that they can continue to benefit off corruption. And it doesn't matter what lengths they will go to any type of length to maintain that level of power, even if it meant through conflict. Tyrannies cannot be ended without the use of force. This is basically what I was just saying. So if someone is tyrannical, they're not going to be willingly giving up power. They are not going to willingly surrender. They are only going to essentially be removed with force. So this could be done through things like civil war, or essentially shocking the system in such a way that these people would not have power to they would not have the ability to maintain power. '53. Those who commit treason disguise their deeds in proclamations and patriotism. So more than often than not, the people that commit treason will always convince you that they are acting in the best interest of the nation, when in fact they are not, and they will also try and convince you that they are doing everything in the best interests of you. 54. Propaganda is a major component in all power systems, both secular and religious. False propaganda is a major component of unprincipled power systems. All power systems endeavor to convince their subjects that the system is good, just beneficent and noble, as well as worthy of perpetuation and defense. The more diagnostic propaganda issued, the more suspicious one should be of this truth. So again, back to what I was saying on 53, is that tyrannical leaders will sell you the idea that what they are doing is for the better interest of the nation, whether you agree or disagree with it, and they will use whatever narrative, propaganda, or whatever they have in their arsenal to convince you that this is the right move, and that it is all in the name of patriotism. 55. Political power in the final analysis is created and maintained by force. So yes, people often refer to this as a dictatorship. So political power, if it's in the will of the people, should be maintained by force. Anything other than that is tyrannical, which the same government will use to maintain it by force, but then the power of the people should be able to overthrow that government or remove that government and install a government that serves the people. 56. A power system, secular or religious, which employs extensive calls to patriotism patriotism or requires verbosity and rhetoric for its preservation is masking tyranny. So any type of society that is going to calls to patriotism and is often backed by some sort of rhetoric like propaganda for its preservation is masked as tyranny. 58. Tyrannies teach what to think. Free men learn how to think. So again, this goes with indoctrination and is often used with subversion and propaganda to program you into such a way that you should think, instead of having free men learn how to think on their own. So without you having to make your own decisions, essentially what the governments, the media, the education system and all that will do is they will try and push an ideology with you instead of trying to teach you how to freely think and be able to have a critical type of thinking where you have a mentality, an open mind to be able to make your own decisions in society. 59. Beware of men who increase their wealth by the use of words, particularly beware of the lawyers or priests who deny natural law. So we all know lawyers, they lie in court for their clients based on what they can prove in a court, or whatever type of narrative that they can spin for their clients. And priests often also do this, where they try and preach the word of God. They try and preach religion to you, and in return they tell you that you should tithe and essentially support the church. And if they deny natural law, then, as it says in precept 1, then this is false. Okay, 60. The patriot being led to the Inquisition dungeons or the executioner's axe will be condemned the loudest by his former friends and allies, for thus they seek to escape the same fate. So these so-called patriots that are essentially treasonous against their own nations will tell you anything so that they can escape the prisons or a death sentence. Will also be shunned out by so-called friends, or let's just call them other types of politicians, for example, where they'll constantly accuse other people so that they can essentially take the light off of them so that they don't get exposed for the same thing. 61. The sweet goddess of peace lives only under the protective arm of the ready god of war. So this is more in line with protecting peace through war. So if you're not ready to go to war and defend your nation will never have peace. 62. The organic founding law of a nation must state with unmistakable and irrevocable specificity and the identity of a homogeneous racial cultural group for whose welfare it was formed, and that the continued existence of a nation is singularly for all time for the welfare of that specific group only. So this would kind of go in line with National Socialism in a way, is that if a nation is built by those groups of people and they have managed to build the economy where they can benefit off of that as a nation, then this type of benefit should only exist to the nation of those people and not for any other foreign people that come in, since they did not add into the economy, thus they should not benefit from it. That race or culture which lets others influence or control any of the following will perish: organs of information, so media, educational institutions, religious institutions, political officers, creation of their money, judicial institutions, cultural institutions, and economic life. Pretty self-explanatory. Just laws require little explanation. Their meaning is irrevocable and in simplicity and specificity. So laws, just like say murder or theft or whatever, are just, and they are pretty irrevocable when people are proven to have stolen or murdered or whatever the crime may be, and it's pretty simple to understand, and it's pretty specific to what it is describing. Men's emotions are stirred far more effectively by the spoken word than by the written word. This is why a ruling tyranny will react more violently to gatherings or dissenters than to books or pamphlets. So again, pretty self-explanatory, but governments and any tyrannical people will always respond to action more than they will to what you write with the pen. The organic founding law of the nation, or any law, is exactly as pertinent as they will and power to enforce it. Let's see here. So the organic founding law of the nation, or any law, is exactly as pertinent as the will, so basically relevant and applicable to a certain instance, and will power to enforce it. It's kind of self-explanatory, but if I had to put it into my own words, I'd say the original laws, or any laws that apply to a certain situation, should be maintained, and you should have a power that enforces that. An unarmed or non-militant people will be enslaved. Yeah. Guns don't kill people, people kill people. So never give up your guns. And I know people might say that's ironic because Germany supposedly gave up their guns during World War II. This isn't entirely true. Germany took the guns away from foreign people, but Germans, for the most part, still had their guns, which was kept that way to essentially defend their nation. Some say the pen is more powerful than the sword. Perhaps so, yet the pen without the sword has no authority. True. So, creating laws on its own is not going to be enforced without any type of authority where people would take more drastic errors, more drastic ways to enforce that. So if you force a law, or if you enforce a law and there is no threat of consequence, no one's going to follow that law. There would have to be consequence in order for people to understand that that consequence is not worth paying the price for. Tyrannies are usually built step by step and disguised by noble rhetoric. So generally how that works is, in most societies, they will never do it all at once because people would notice too quickly, and ultimately that would cause a lot of people to then get upset and rebel. Whereas if you implement tyrannical policy and you took over slowly but surely over generation, nobody's going to exactly notice that unless they look decades later where their society has fundamentally completely changed, in a sense where it's not the same country that they knew about historically. Only then would people realize, and even in some cases then it would be too late. So it's good to be well versed on your country's history, your country's laws, and this is information that should be taught in schools, it should be taught by parents, it should be taught in every aspect of society, so that society can essentially not be subverted over time. The difference between a patriot and a terrorist is control of the press. So basically biased and non-biased information. A terrorist is always going to push biased information to further his side, and a patriot is always going to post unbiased media where they are not trying to protect any particular people from prosecution. The judgment of the guardians, the leaders, must be true to natural law and tempered by reason. So essentially you should be able to criticize your leaders, your politicians, and anyone that's essentially in a position of government where they are affecting and influencing other people's lives, especially if it's negative. And if not, then essentially that's going against natural law. 72. Materialism is a base and destructive. The guardians of a nation must constantly warn against and combat the materialistic spirit in the nation. Acquisition of wealth and property as need for the well-being of one's family and obtained by honorable means is right and proper. Exploitation, particularly through usury, is destructive to a nation. So the more material stuff that you want, the more loans that you are likely to go and take, and the more interest you are likely to pay back on what you have taken. So unless you got all the money in the world, you're probably going to end up using usury, which is still illegal. Materialism leads to men to seek artificial status through wealth and property. True social status comes from service to family, race, and nation. So the only thing you should possess in your life is having your family, your racial group, and your nation. Everything else will not matter otherwise. Materialism ultimately leads to conspicuous and unnecessary consumption, which in turn leads to the rape of nature and destruction of the environment. It is unnatural. The true guardians of the nation must wholly untainted by be wholly untainted by materialism. So essentially, if we want technology, we're just going to go and mine everything out and start producing, and we're going to want more technology, and ultimately this is going to destroy the environment, because we are destroying the environment to get to the resources that we need to ultimately further the material gains that we desire. The function of a merchant or salesman is to provide a method of exchange. A merchant who promotes unnecessary consumption and materialism will not be tolerated. The function of a merchant or a salesman is to provide a method of exchange. A merchant who promotes unnecessary consumption and materialism must not be tolerated. So essentially, the salesman is just there to sell the item, not promote unnecessary consumption. So consuming things that you do not need, and materialistic things that you do not need or want. The only lawful functions of money are as a medium of exchange, and especially usury, are unlawful. Usury, interest at any percentage, is a high crime which cannot be tolerated. Yeah, I agree. So if you take out a loan, you should be able to take out that loan without interest, which is essentially what Gaddafi, Saddam Hussein, Hitler, and JFK were all basically eliminated for. Or at least 3 of them were eliminated for doing it, and the other one was eliminated for talking about it. A nation with aristocracy of money, lawyers, and merchants will become a tyranny. I mean, that's pretty self-explanatory as well. Basically, people just hoarding power. The simplest way to describe a usury-based central banking system is this. The bankers demand the property of the nation as collateral for their loans. At interest, more money is owed them that they create with the loans. So eventually the bankers foreclose on the nation. So that is just debt slavery. You take out a loan for a certain amount and you end up with so much interest that you'll be paying that off forever, and it keeps you working the machine, which essentially generates money for the people in the central banking system. they make money off interest that they charge you. Usury interest, inflation, and oppressive taxation are the theft by deception and destroy the moral fabric of the nation. Yeah, so essentially you will be paying to live in a house that you almost spend no time at, working a job that is only going to pay you a certain amount, just to get taxed on every single thing that you're going to do with your money. Yeah, which essentially will destroy the fabric of that society. So it's a form of slave labor. 80. Wealth gained without sacrifices or honest labor will usually be misused. Oh, well, if you didn't earn it, then you don't care about it. If I give you something, you're less likely to care about it than if you went and earned it and bought it yourself. Nothing in nature is static. Either the life force grows and expands or it decays and dies. Pretty straightforward as well. Respect must be earned. It cannot be demanded or assumed. Yeah. So I will be able to give you, a common amount of respect. I'm not going to disrespect anyone out of no reason. But if you want a higher level of respect and you want to be respected as someone that is of high status, then that cannot be demanded. You can only earn respect, because respect is, after all, it is earned. Avoid a vexatious man, for his venom will poison your own nature. So essentially just, wait, where was avoid a vexatious man, for his venom will poison your own nature. Yeah, so just avoid toxic people, essentially, because when they are toxic towards you, they want to get a reaction out of you. Essentially, they make you toxic, and the only thing that you're going to do is you are going to become the very thing that you didn't like. So you can walk away or say nothing back. Let him be as vile as he's going to be, and don't let it get to you. Okay, self-discipline is the mark of a higher man. Definitely. If you don't have the discipline to keep yourself in line, nobody else is going to do this, and therefore you are not going to be someone that's going to achieve anything in your life, because you will not have any motivation to keep yourself going. One measure of a man is cheerfulness in adversity. Pretty self-explanatory as well. 86. A fool judges others by their words. A wise man judges others by their actions and accomplishments. So we mentioned something similar like this earlier, where it doesn't matter what people say, because anyone can say anything and not have anything to back that up. Instead of judging him by his words, you'd rather judge him by what he does in his life and how he does it. So if a man is not just about bragging and trying to essentially tell the world how great he is, uh, you could have someone that is an introvert that does not talk but has great accomplishments because they put action into everything that they do, and then they get far, which would ultimately come to down to that self-discipline, where if he had the self-discipline, you could make it work, and you could study properly. '87. In our relationships or interactions, as in all nature's laws, to each action there is a reaction. That which we plant will be harvested, if not by ourselves, then by another. So what you reap is what you're going to sow, essentially. And sometimes you might give an action and people might react negatively or positively, depending on what it is, and vice versa. But essentially, ultimately, what you reap, you will sow. These are the sure signs of a sick and dying nation. If you see any of them, your guardians are committing treason. Mixing and destruction of founding race. Destruction of family units. Oppressive taxation. Corruption of the law. Terror and suppression. Terror and suppression against those who warn of the nation's errors. Immorality, like drugs, drunkenness, etc. Infanticide, now called abortion. Destruction of the currency, so inflation or usury. Aliens in the land, alien culture, so foreign invaders, immigrants, whatever you want to call them, racial aliens. Materialism, so material gain over everything else, including keeping your country, a protected society, and any foreign wars. Guardians, leaders who pursue wealth or glory. Homosexuality, religion not based on natural law. Because the beauty of the white Aryan woman must not perish from the earth. Yeah, so that's more or less the 88 precepts, and what they mean. I know I didn't go too in depth about this, but I think eventually I will make a more in detailed descriptive video on what this means. I'll dig much more into it, go a lot further into it to better explain. But I thought I'd come and do a short stream about this and essentially explain more or less what these things mean. So this is in no way supposed to be racist or about white supremacy or all that. It's a set of laws that are laid down to essentially protect a society, and as you can see, this does talk specifically to white people, but these types of things can be applied to any society, any racial group of people. Let's see, maybe what I can do. Uh, wonder if this has changed. Yes, it did. That changed. Fantastic. Well, I think I'm going to end it off here, and I'll eventually do a more in-depth version of this, but that is the 88 precepts simplified with very, very basic types of explanations. I'll do another one on this with the 88 precepts where we can really dig into it. And yeah, that's essentially what we could eventually do down the line. But that is going to be me for now, and a nice little short stream about the 88 precepts and what they actually mean. So thank you to everyone that tuned in. I know there was a fair amount of you that did pop in, and I appreciate you stopping by. I hope you all take it easy and you have a good one.